Welcome to the neighborhood, Happy Hood the podcast, where we deliver meaningful content to grow your faith, well-being, and leadership skills. Hey neighbor, I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray, lifestyle coach, inspiring others to develop self-worth through leadership applications that will enable them to live in purpose. Happy Hood the podcast.
Finish
Message.
what you started.
Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Happy Hood, the podcast. Welcome back to the neighborhood. I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray. And today's guest is a startup founder, writer, podcast host. He has a passion for helping businesses scale their products while building the right team. He worked on many different startups, in which 3 of them he co-founded, and another 2 he helped to scale to employ over 100 people. He is also a soon-to-be author. Be launching his book. His book will be coming out very soon. The title of it is The Resilient Scaleup, the CEO Guide to Growing a Business Sustainably. Please welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Reggie James. How you doing, sir?
Really well. Thanks so much, Jay. Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for the glowing introduction. You hit all the points. Certainly, really excited to be on your show and talk to your audience and hang out with you for the next kind of 45 minutes.
Yeah, well, cool, man. I think this is gonna be really, really cool, really interesting, and family. I'm just be full transparent. As you know, and as you've been listening, we have just recently finished up our Attitude of Gratitude series. So Reggie is actually kicking off the School of Leadership series. So if I sound a little rusty, it's because I'm getting back in the swing of it. And feel, if I get a little tongue tied, it just, hey, I'm just getting back in the swing of getting back in the mood of doing these types of podcasts. But Reggie, I'm glad we had an opportunity to connect, in which we have some definitely some similarities when it comes to our journey. But you wrote this book, The Resilient Scaleup, the CEO Guide to Growing a Business Sustainably. I think one of the biggest things that I guess was kind of like, okay, it seems like a culture book, but you make it very plain and simple in the beginning of like, hey, this is not necessarily a book about culture, in which you had a couple moments there as you were saying, hey, I kind of laugh at HR or that's maybe so kind of boring to me. So this is not a culture book. So I guess walk us through or talk to us about what gave you the idea to write this book. What was the catalyst that really was what helped you to birth and foster this book?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's funny that first kind of introduction, and
Yeah.
I try to hit you with it out the gate that I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
And this is not that book. Like, this is not just another book about culture and HR and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, for me, when I wrote that, it was actually kind of having written the whole book and then thinking back to the introduction and kind of looking at the chapters and thinking, oh, like someone might be confused and think like, oh, I'm like a career HR person. I'm really not.
Mm-hmm.
Like my experience comes from having been in business, having worked in scaling technology businesses, and then seeing what didn't work, what did work, what went wrong, where the issues were. And culture is a big part of it, but I think it's around, when do you focus on culture? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, writing the book, if I think about kind of where I was when I decided to do it, it was at a place where I was going through transition in my own business and thinking, man, like, I want to write something that consolidates my knowledge, my experience, some
Mm-hmm.
of the crazier stories of things that I've seen working with startups. I think one of the things that for me, it was a way for me to solidify all the stuff that I've done and package it into, a a clear kind of guide that someone else could use. And it's funny
Mm.
when you're writing, you might not actually know what the title is. You might not actually know
Yeah.
exactly what's going to come out of it. So I just started writing. And that's kind of how you ended up with a book that's like, well, hey, is this an HR book? Like, no, it's actually for people who are new to, to growing their business, and they need to bring in
Yeah.
a lot of people, but you're not getting the blanket, HR kind of ideas. You're getting the ideas from someone who's done it, who's been there, and is
Mm.
kind of trying to help you navigate the pitfalls that I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Now you make the case, as you mentioned, right out the gate, that this is not a book about culture. But I guess as I have read, I haven't, read the whole book, but just kind of bits and pieces of different chapters, it definitely seemed like culture has some underlining tones there, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess to kind of help us build this some context, how would you define culture, or how is the book defining culture?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a definition of culture. I wrote my own definition of culture in the
Hmm.
book, and my definition of culture um, is literally every decision you make as a leader. So if you
Mm.
decide, hey, we're going to found this business in, San Francisco, or we're going to found it in Chicago, or we're going to found in New
Yeah.
York, that's your first bit of culture, because you're borrowing from the culture of the place in which you found. Are you founding
Mm.
downtown? Okay, awesome. Like, how are people getting to your office? Are they taking a bike? Are they taking the train? Are they driving in? That's culture. Like,
Hmm.
these little things start to build culture. Like the colors of your branding. Do you say hello when you come into the building, and to see people, to greet people? Do you say anything, or do you just walk past them? um
Mm.
Culture is, do you hire contractors, or do you make everyone full time? So it's for me, the decision, for me, when I think about culture and the definition of culture, it's in every single decision you make as a business leader. So it's not
Mm.
the words that you put up, or kind of the values that you state. The culture is felt, and it's derived from every decision you make. And that was probably one of the big things I wanted, to convey to business leaders and CEOs when they read this, because I think oftentimes you might think, oh, this is how we're shaping the culture, or these words describe our culture. But really, the culture is created by every single decision you make. So in
Hmm.
that, it's not a book about culture. It's not a book that wants you to focus on culture, but we can't ignore culture. And so culture is,
Yeah.
it's certainly a big theme that I talk about throughout the book. And there's a couple opening chapters about, kind of focusing on striking the right balance with culture, because I think
Hmm.
culture, I think, I think we've gone too far. I think we think
Mm.
culture is everything in terms of, how you get it right. But I think there's other things that we need to think about too. And so it's a little bit
Yeah.
controversial, and that's what I
Yeah.
try to pull up through the book.
Very, very thought provoking,
Mm,
especially when you think about current times,
yeah,
where you hear these sayings, do it for the culture, you
yeah,
know. And we have pretty much overused culture, in which I don't know if we truly understand what is culture, you know,
yeah.
because we have used it so many times. As you at writing this book, and I want you to also provide us a little bit about your what you do for a living, because I
Sure.
know you are a consultant, and this is kind of falls in line with individuals or companies reaching out to you. So I want to make sure we definitely talk about that, because I think that will definitely help to connect a little bit more of the why for this book. But is this book simply for CEOs?
It's for CEOs, it's for business leaders. It's
Hmm.
for leaders. I mean, if you're a
Yeah.
leader in a company that is is new, or is growing, or you're gonna go through a growth phase, the book is for you. I mean,
Hmm.
that's what I had in mind, was targeting people who, say you're in a startup business, you've got product market fit, and you've just raised $20 million. Okay, now you're gonna expand your team.
Hmm.
Well, how are you going to do that? What things should you be thinking about as you do that? This is me drawing on experience of having been through that, having been, a part of a startup company. We were building an intelligent assistant, and this was maybe 6 7 years ago, before these things really took off. What we're seeing with like
Hmm.
chat GPT and all that stuff, we were already working on that type of technology. And we went through a phase of
Wow.
massive growth, and it's kind of like, well, what are the things that we should be thinking about, and how do we do this sustainably, and how do we develop the right type of culture. Speaking of culture, as we bring people on, how do we preserve the culture that we had? Like, there's all these kind of questions and things that new leaders of growing technology companies, any business, but you know taking that company from
Yeah.
20 to 50 to 100 people, there are lessons in there that I think would be really important for leaders in that context.
Hmm. Definitely. When you think about, and as I read through the book, um, questions are just thoughts came in my mind around building a team.
Yeah.
Because one thing that you mentioned in the book is different processes, as far as hiring
Yeah.
individuals, your hiring process. And you kind of mentioned a technique in the book. When you think about, as an entrepreneur, and as you are growing and you're thinking about expanding your team, because even as an entrepreneur, if you go from one person to where you
Mm,
wore all the hats to now maybe a 5 10 people team, h- a what is some best practice of doing that,
mm,
and b, how do you sustain it, right? When you're talking about like sustainability within your title, how do you sustain that from being one person to
mm.
now being 10 people?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and it's a really challenging exercise. And I talk to CEOs of growing businesses where they've gone from 1 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 and beyond. It's really challenging, and I think if you think about kind of the example you set up, 1 to 10, like think about the lines of communication, between 1 to 3 people to now 3 to 5. Like, it becomes exponential in terms of how many different interactions there might be between individuals. And so you've got to
Mhm.
think about, well, how do you manage that communication, and what is your way of communicating? I think the first bit is it's tricky, and there's not really any exact science to it. A lot of it comes back to the individual founder, like, or that founding
Mhm.
team, in terms of how they get stuff done. But then I
Mhm.
think I think in the early stage of a business, it's bringing on people who are adaptable, because when you're going through, kind of that startup journey, like, no 2 days look the same, and then your
Mhm.
business within 6 months could look dramatically different. So I think, to make it sustainable in the early days, you have to bring on people who are flexible, who are adaptable, who are agile, and can move with the change of the business. So the
Mhm.
business is going to continually change. Like, you might land a big client, and that means you're dropping tools and focusing on everything to do with getting that client on board. You need to
Mhm.
have people who can adapt and change in those situations very quickly. And I think that's how it works for that small startup team. A lot of people, I don't know if you have any listeners that have gone through this, or are planning to work in startup. It can be a
Mhm.
really fun, exciting adventure, because, like I said, no 2 days are the same. You're doing, you have to do everything. You don't have a job. You say, I'm a software developer, and I just software develop. Like, one day you might be software developing, the next day you might be on the phone, like, doing a sales call, or you might be doing
Mhm.
support, or you might be doing customer testing on one of your products.
Mhm.
Like, you're doing everything, and it can be really fun and an energizing experience. So I think early days it's pretty straightforward, but then when you start thinking about, well, how do we now go from 10 to 20, or
Yeah.
from 10 to 30, or 10 to 50, that's where it starts to get really, really interesting.
Yeah. When you think about, as you mentioned, someone that's very adaptable. And when I think about that and think about just the perspective of in the beginning, right? As you mentioned, for our startup, and to now we go into 5 to 10 years and we continue to grow. when does the problem, and I'm trying to articulate this, so bear with me. When does the individual that's able to flex becomes now a detriment to the business?
Oh yeah.
Meaning, I need thinkers to be thinkers, and I need software developers to be software developers,
Yeah.
because we can't do everything and be effective
100%.
When, like, how do you balance that out? And how, like, when you think about going back to your hiring practice, even if you don't get someone that's adaptable, is it, I guess, are you willing to trade off that, hey,
Mm,
this individual is a great salesperson, but
yeah.
they truly suck at this,
Yeah.
whatever this is
100%.
may be. How do you balance that?
It's interesting, and it's a great question too, because you also have to balance it with what you can find in the market for what you're willing
Yeah.
to pay. And so
Mm,
all these variables, they play a part in terms of what your early team looks like. Like if you're
yeah.
able to find people who are willing to take an equity, stake it for a smaller paycheck, like
Hmm.
that's the person who's like, yeah, I'm on this journey and I'm willing to adapt and flex. And you
Hmm.
know that because they're taking a sacrifice for, hopefully a bigger payoff later. If you get someone who's, highly skilled in the thing they've been doing for the last, 10, 15 years, I don't want to label anyone, but oftentimes you find that, those people who have a lot of skills in one area, getting them early up front can be a big cost to the business because you do
Hmm.
have so many different things that you need to do. And
Hmm.
you've got an extra pair of hands there that's waiting for, something to come down to the assembly line for them to pick up. And it's like, well, this is not the right thing for me to pick up. So I'm not going to pick it up.
Hmm.
Like that's a big cost to a business early stage.
Hmm.
As you start to grow and mature, you're 100% right. You do need to introduce more systems, more processes. You need to introduce, more ways of working that are repeatable, systematic. You can plug in people. You can take people out, and the process still works. You're not as reliant on people anymore. Making that shift is really challenging. And I think
Hmm.
it really depends on you, again, as a founder or a founding team, in terms of what that's going to look like. And actually,
Yeah.
one of the reasons I wrote, the Resilient Scale Up is for that, particular situation, because one of the things I think is we focus on culture so much, and the culture should be like this, and the experience of the company should be like this, and my leaders should be this way, and it's
Hmm.
it's all it's all these kind of expectations on what the company should do. But the realities of a startup business is that 9 times out of 10 it's chaotic. Like it's
Yeah.
chaotic because like you're literally trying to fly a plane that does not have a full engine. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
have seat belts. Some of the seats aren't there. Like you're trying to hold this thing together. And you know, to then focus on, the employee experience up front and focus
Yeah.
all your attention on that means you're not focused on, hitting the target in the market, right? You're not focused on your go to market. You're focused more internally, and that's a lesson I've learned myself from going through this. That's
Hmm.
something I've seen other businesses do where they take too long getting out there, getting the product out there, finding out what
Hmm.
their customer thinks, because they're too focused on, building the team and making the team, exactly right. So I think there's a balance there. And I think, making that shift, what I would tell, early stage entrepreneurs is, yeah, culture is important, but the reality is that you're going to have to refresh those people, and people don't
Yeah.
think about that. Especially employees don't think about that when they come
Hmm.
on board, that you actually have an expiration date. Like Jay, I'm going to bring you on my team, but you're good for the next like 3 years, like, because we're going to
Hmm.
get to a stage where your skills might not match what I need to do. And
Yeah.
that's a hard
Yeah.
lesson to hear as an employee.
Yeah.
But I think as a leader and as a business owner, or an entrepreneur, you've got to understand up front that the people you're hiring right now, they might not, most likely will not, be right for your next stage of business. And you have to have a plan in place of what you're going to do.
Yeah. The plan in place, as well as, because you hitting on something that is, I have seen firsthand. Okay. I have been a leader in corporate America for over 7, 8 years, and have been an informal leader for another 15 years. So when the role or the job outgrows the skill of the employee,
Yeah.
we do, and I'm saying we leaders, we do, we can do a bad job of not preparing our business as well as people in the seat,
Yeah.
because and that's why I would say, as I have read through this book, um Reggie, I think it is not only applicable to startups, but you
Mm,
even mentioned some companies that have been out for years,
yeah.
that did not have a startup mentality, or a mentality of how to scale up,
Mm,
a mentality of how are we expanding, how are we changing, how are we being more nimble,
yeah.
in our business, because we do a disservice to employees, to people, to our crew, however you want to put them, when we know for a fact the role has truly changed, and the skills that we currently have in the seat is no longer applicable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
no
think that's spot
longer
on.
applicable. you
That
know
that's spot on.
Yeah,
I
and
think
it's hard sometimes to have those conversations, but I think the sooner we're able to have those conversations, you know what, the role has changed.
yeah.
You know,
It's a really good one, and I'm thinking back because I've worked for and I've worked with a lot of
hmm
companies. One as an employee, two as a consultant, three as a
hmm
founder, and I've seen every end of the spectrum. I've seen the end of the spectrum where, the culture is all about, it's niceness, it's acceptance, it's let's get
hmm
everybody on board. Everyone's super friendly and polite,
hmm
and it's just a really great, kind of loving family atmosphere. And I
yeah,
think those businesses, to use an expression that some might find offensive, they carry a lot of dead weight, and
mm,
I
yeah,
think they do so to their detriment, because it's like, hey, we're going to keep someone in this seat because they're a nice person and they've served the organization for the last, 10 years or so, or whatever it may
hmm
be, but not understanding that the skills no longer match, what you need to achieve. And then I've seen the other end of the spectrum where it's completely cutthroat, and
hmm
the businesses will cut you without any warning. Like they just come on and they lock you out, they freeze you out of the systems and send you an
hmm
email and say you've been retrenched, or you've been fired. And so
yeah,
I think there needs to be a balance in terms of how you manage that. And I like what you said as well too about preparing people for it. And I think that's the role of a leader.
yeah,
Like you need
yeah.
to be
We got to
thinking,
prepare them.
okay, we know where we're going. Like we have a strategy, we have a roadmap, we got a vision of where we're going. How do the skills and the talent of these people match where we're going to go? Okay, what's the plan we need to have in place to help them get there? But then also, as a leader, that which people are going to make the jump and
Yeah,
which ones probably aren't. And I think
yeah,
you hit the nail on the head to say, well, how do we prepare those people for the eventualities that their skills may not match where the company's going, or what we're doing.
exactly, exactly. To where, to your point, we know the ones that have the will
Yeah.
to evolve, that really their engagement is about being challenged and learning new skills. And then we know the other ones like, hey, I just want to I just want to get that direct deposit every other week.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
100%.
I just
Yeah.
want to get that direct deposit every week.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do. And I'm not saying there's not a place for them, but I think sooner that we can really have those conversations, say, hey, you know what? This role here has changed, and
Yeah.
the skills that you have, or the lack of gaining more skills, that, hey, again, you want to not do anything, that's definitely your reason, your choice. but understand it has changed.
Yeah.
Um, One other thing that you mentioned in the book that really just got my attention. And family, we talking to Reggie James. He is a startup founder, writer, podcast. He soon will be releasing his book, The Resilient Scaleup, the CEO Guide to Growing a Business Sustainably. And he's in Australia as well. I forgot to mention that too.
Yeah.
He's all the way in Australia. So really cool for technology for us to connect. One thing you mentioned in the book, in the chapter around leading yourself, which that really didn't come paramount for me until really later on in my leadership journey.
Mm,
That you have to take time to lead yourself. You
yeah.
have to take time to build yourself up. You have to take time to find ways to release your emotions, find ways to really continue to build your skills, how you're connecting, how you articulating the vision out. And you said this, and I'm gonna quote this from the book. It says, "It is nearly impossible to build a sustainable, high performing, and productive team when we function from a place of internal chaos."
Mm,
Brother, I underline that. I'm gonna read that again. It is nearly impossible to build a sustainable, high performing, and productive team when we, the leader,
mm,
function from a place of internal chaos.
yeah.
To me, sometimes, not sometimes, but to me, that screams out when we have come to a place of burnout.
Mm,
And when I think about different types of leaders, myself, I am a creative leader. I like to create things. I like to start things. I like to really use design thinking to apply it to different things and make it better, right? When I also think about servant leaders, we have a tendency of pouring out so much, and we don't do a good job of getting refilled.
mm,
So when you wrote that, and the next paragraphs was around like shadow self, and we'll get to that soon. But what was you really conveying, or was that something that you have lived out, or you have observed,
mm.
or helped coach others to overcome that internal chaos?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and that chapter about leading yourself, I'm actually already thinking about, a 2.0 or version 2 of this book, and actually want to build
Yeah,
out on some of the concepts in that last
it's
chapter. I think for me, I tried to keep the book a bit more practical and less less about kind of personal development, but I had
mm-hmm,
to add one element of that into the scale up culture cycle, to say, well, it's great if you're focused on your strategy and your vision, and you know what it is that you're trying to do in the market. It's great that you have good techniques and tactics for building your team, but if you're not actually thinking about yourself and how you're going to lead that organization,
yeah,
like
man,
none of this none of this really matters, because it all
yeah,
comes back to who's at the helm, like who's
mm-hmm,
steering the ship. And I think that's true certainly for CEOs of companies of any size,
yeah,
but it's true for any leader that has people following them, that
mm-hmm,
if you're showing up from a place of chaos or pain or hurt or unresolved anything, it shows up in how you lead. It presents itself in how you talk to people. It presents itself
yeah,
in how you collaborate. It presents itself in, interestingly, who you promote,
mm-hmm,
who you recruit.
mm-hmm,
For me, this had just been, it was important for me to put this in there, because I worked with a lot of leaders of businesses that had already gone through this journey. Like I worked with
yeah,
several businesses that were large established businesses that had gone through kind of that startup and then scaling journey, and have
Hmm.
been bought, once or twice, and you've got founders at the helm that, um, you can see that the place they're leading from is not healthy,
Yeah.
and that trickles down. Like you can see it and feel it, at the very bottom of the org chart, right? Like
Hmm.
in terms of how it feels to be a part of those companies. So for me, it was important to call that out, to say, hey, there's a part of you, um, that you've gotta you've got to work on, and you've got to make sure you're in a good place. I'm reflecting on other leaders that I've worked with as well, who,
Yeah.
um, they clearly had some dysfunction within, and it showed up in the way we worked. It showed up in the fact that we weren't accepted by the market, because you look at
Hmm.
who's driving the bus, and it's like, well, this person is, they're not really a whole person, and I don't think that
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that is talked about enough in the business context, but I think it's, I feel like people are starting to open their eyes to the fact that, hey, it's not all, system and process, and, go to market strategy and plans. There also is a component of this that comes back to you as a person, and how you've prepared yourself to do the job that's in front of you. And I think that needs to be a practice for leaders, is to work on themselves.
You as a person, where you leading yourself, and no matter how you want to slice it, you are a people leader.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
hundred
mean,
percent.
you are leading people. Um, and when I saw that, it helped. Well, I couldn't help but to think about a couple things. Myself, my father, my mom and father. Mom and dad was preachers. That they were pastors. So seeing their leadership style really helped to mold mine,
Mm,
because they work with people, you know, as well as when I really thought about it, is like the first entrepreneur was my father that
yeah.
I saw, as a pastor, and knowing that it had to be. I'm not saying there was one incident that really I can recall, but as a people leader, as a servant leader, especially as a servant leader, I know that there was time during his 40 something years of pastoring that he had some internal chaos.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That you're not going to be leading people and not have some internal chaos of yourself
Yep.
that is going to somewhat impede on your decision making,
Yeah.
on your vision, you know, and that's why that chapter, that area of the book really spoke to me, because as for myself, and this is why I always say, family, that leadership is not is not a title but a choice,
Mm,
and that even as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a family, I had to work on myself,
mm,
because if I don't come to to a period or a moment where I can work on myself, I am not going to. There's no way that I can be an effective
mm.
leader. There's no way that I can be an effective leader, you know. And I just want to, I guess, pause for the cause for those that's listening and those that are leaders. Take time to work on yourself.
Mm.
I know many times we put a lot of people ahead of us. We put the team, we put the company ahead of us. But again, if you're coming from a very depleted, a very deficit, if your emotional intelligence, all these things are running at a deficit, you're not going to be effective.
Yeah.
You're
I
not
think
go,
I like that you connected the idea that to burnout, because I
yeah.
think I think when you're in a leadership role, you are giving more than you're receiving,
Oh
from
yeah.
from the people that you're giving to. And I
Totally.
think in that space, it is easy to, and I'm thinking about your parents, pastoring, like, I feel like that's a job that, people don't realize, how much you are thinking about other people and you're
Yes.
focused on them. But I like what you're saying, and I like the connection to burnout, with that chaos with them, because yeah, if you're not managing that, then your leadership is not going to be effective. I 100% agree with that.
It's not. Now, and you talk about shadow self, shadowing yourself. I hope I'm saying that correctly. The phrase of, as you're saying, like integrating your shadow side, you know,
Mm,
and where you had a persistent sense of a need to not be bored, you know.
mm,
But I guess you also kind of saying, hey, there was some underlying laziness with that as well. Like,
mm.
talk to us about that whole concept of like your shadow self,
Yeah.
and how did you overcome that? Again, when we thinking about leading ourselves and we think about being an effective leader.
Yeah. I think for me, when I think about this, and it's recognizing that we all have bright sides and we all have shadow sides.
Yeah.
In terms of, we have qualities about ourselves that are things that we want to elevate and push to the front. We want to be known for, but then we also
Mm,
have, negative tendencies. We have tendencies
yeah.
to do things that are not beneficial to us. I'll name
Hmm.
one: overeating, right? Like, that's not a good quality. No one wants to be known for overeating. Like, I sat down and
Yeah.
smashed a bag of chips. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, but what is it that led you there? And that's just one example. Like, there could be many examples, but the whole concept of the shadow self is, if you're not understanding your own tendencies for things that are not good for you. Like in the book, I use an example of a leader I worked with who really
Hmm.
loved the spotlight. Like, he really just loved, being praised and adored by media and people. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
that's narcissism. You know what I mean? Like, that you have narcissistic tendencies. And it's
Hmm.
like, okay, understand that that is your bent, that's your thing, and figure out how do you use that, for good. How do you use your negative tendencies for good,
Hmm.
rather than hiding from them or trying to mask them? And that's the whole idea of integrating, like, your shadow self, is because you need to understand that, hey, you're not a perfect person, right? Like, you're not
Yeah.
you're not in
Yeah.
itself, always a person who's always doing the right thing. Understand where, you could be led
Hmm.
astray. Understand where,
Yeah.
you might fall down. I think about other leaders
Hmm.
who are aware of, for example, I know a leader who's aware of his tendency for grandiosity. And so
Hmm.
he's made it a mission of his to give away a certain amount of his wealth. So, like, he will not have wealth above a certain number, because
Hmm.
he recognizes his own desire for, wealth and things. And so for him, that's his way of guarding his own heart from where he could
Yeah.
be where he could be knocked down. And so the whole
Hmm.
point of it is just, it's about understanding yourself. It's about understanding the good
Self
parts
awareness.
and self-awareness, and then figuring out how to integrate that into one picture of yourself. Otherwise, you spend so much time running away from it, rather than doing the job you need to do. So that's kind of the whole idea there. And the reason I
Yeah.
felt it was important to include that is because, having worked with a lot of top leaders of big companies, they are not whole people. And when they come to work, they're showing up as a role and a character. And
Mm,
oftentimes it's very taxing. And you can see, I mean, I use the term you use, burnout, like, they're burnt out
mhm.
because they're not actually who they really are. They haven't
Yeah.
actually been able to show up in an authentic way, because they've been playing a part
Mhm.
for so long. And so you start seeing the shadow self leak, and you don't want to see your leader, in some compromising situations, which, I've seen many times, because, I've seen leaders who refuse to work on themselves, or, they haven't taken time away from the job to work on
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. It's so critical, man. Self-awareness leading with authenticity. It's all there. I wanted to again, when I go back, when you look at the title of the book, And when I think about the scale up, and when I think about just the sustainability,
Mm,
one word comes to my mind, and that is succession plan.
yeah. Mm,
When you are working, or when you have worked with these companies as well as startups, how do you plan out, and what's maybe some best practice, even
mm,
as an entrepreneur, where you may have a small team and you may not think about succession plan, because it may be down the road. However, I would say you probably need to start thinking about that. You
yeah.
know, whether that is, life insurance, all these different practical wealth measures that we can do. But when you think about the company as a whole and sustaining that scale up, talk to us a little bit about how you implement, or how do you coach to succession planning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think when people start their business, they're not actually, oftentimes, they're not thinking about, what succession looks like. And I think it
Hmm.
also comes back to your goals, right? Like, so if you're building a
Yeah,
business, is your plan to build something that lasts, or is your plan to build something, to scale it up and sell it really quickly?
yeah.
Like, how are you thinking about, an exit? I actually spoke with an entrepreneur, CEO, of a business that I think they've been in business for maybe 3 or 4 years now. They've got about 30 people. I was talking to him about this very same topic of succession,
Hmm.
and asking, what is your exit plan? And he had 4 ideas already of how he was
Wow.
going to exit and what it meant for him. And so I
Yeah.
think a
Wow.
big part of that is understanding yourself. I mean, coming back to understanding yourself, like, are you the person that, you know, loves the running around and hustle of the startup culture, or are you the person that loves to, steer something that's set up and ready to go? They're two different jobs, right? Like, it's a different job to run a company that has, history in the marketplace
Hmm.
than, to start something. So it's first understanding yourself, what you want out of it, what you think, you want from a financial perspective, from a life perspective, and then thinking very clearly, okay, well, what's our course to get there? Like, what's our
Yeah.
roadmap going to look like to get there? And then what job am I going to hold when it's done? And I think it's important to think through that from the beginning, so that you build with that in mind. Like, you build with it in mind that, hey, I'm going to move on, and we're going to hire a CEO to come in and do this, or I'm going to raise one up from within, like, and,
Hmm.
and build with that in mind. That, I think that's the way that that has to happen.
Totally, totally. It kind of, as you was talking about, I know you mentioned this in your book, of understanding your North Star,
Yeah.
and where you're going. And I know for myself, I haven't gave that much thought, you know,
Okay.
and that's definitely in which I like the book, how it really calls out, when you think about a guide for CEOs, right? A guide for
Mm,
business leaders, right? It helps you to kind of, okay, I'm a little low in this area. My
mm,
score, what I'm saying, or the way that I'm measuring this, I need some improvement, in
yeah.
this area. So I like how this truly helps to provide you and give you some practical steps to get there, to truly
Yeah.
get there. Again, we're talking to Reggie James. He will soon be launching his book, The Resilient Scale Up, the CEO Guide to Growing a Business Sustainably. Reggie, we'll kind of lead with this, man, and just some couple closing thoughts. Um, what do you want individuals to walk away with
Mm.
from reading this book?
I think the last chapter, summarizes, quite well in terms of you being the most important part of this journey. So
Yeah.
if you're in a scaling business, if you're a leader in a scaling business, really, if you're in a leader in any business at all, is really around, you being a key part of that success, but, it being about something deeper than what you see on the surface level around hiring, or around, you mentioned the North Star as well. Like, those things are important, but end of the day, it's going to come back to you as a person
Mhm.
and who you are. I left some little nuggets in there, like I call them little nuggets of wisdom at the beginning of the chapter,
Yeah.
business lessons that I've learned over the years. And one of them is about, the culture of an organization is not the words that we write, that we say, these are our values and this is how we describe our culture and the behaviors. Like, really, what is left behind is the values and the beliefs of the founders. Like, the company will reflect what you personally think and believe. And I think that's true of every leader. Like, you might be a part of an organization that has an idea around, here's our culture, but at the end of the day, you're going to lead in a way that reflects your beliefs and your values. So you should know very clearly what they are. And I think
Yeah.
that's the thing I'd want people to walk away with is really that concept of self leadership, of understanding who they are, understanding how they're showing up, and looking after themselves, because that reflects in their leadership journey, whether it's building a business, whether it's leading a team. It all reflects back in based on how they show up for themselves.
Yeah. Totally, man. One last thought. How would you define leadership?
Leadership. How would I define leadership? That's a great question. Um, I would define leadership as influence, and I think of leadership as, yeah, your ability uh, to impact, or to motivate the things and the people around you based on what you say, what you do. It's influence. So whether you have people underneath you, in terms of leading a team or not, we are all influencing each other in different ways. And I think being very conscious of how you're doing that, because that is leadership. So people are watching. I was talking to someone the other day talking about basketball players and football players, you think like the Dennis Rodmans, these kind of guys like that, they say, I'm not a leader, like I'm just me. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, you are a leader because you have influence. So
Hmm.
the fact that people are looking and watching what you do, and it's shaping how they think or how they behave themselves, that is influence. And I think that's leadership. So whether you realize it or not, people are watching, and the way you influence them is leadership.
It's leadership. Love it, man. Love it. I want to thank my guest, Reggie James, for coming on the show, for providing his expertise. Family, go get the book. And Reggie, when can we expect the book to come out? Any big
Yes.
big announcements coming soon?
So the book is on pre-order on Amazon right now.
Okay.
Um, but it will come out on May 21st, and
Okay.
that then you can order the paperback as well.
Great. And tell us, where can people maybe follow you or get in contact with you?
So I think probably the best way to follow me is on Instagram, Shift to Tech with Reg, or you can always drop me an email, reggie@beakerandflint.com.
Thank you, sir. Family, again, I want to thank my friend, my brother, all the way from Australia. Again, just want to thank you for coming on the show, talking to us about your expertise. Really great information, family. So definitely, we will definitely be having all this information as the book comes out. So we'll definitely let you know. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here on The Neighborhood as we talk about School of Leadership. I want to thank you for being who you are, and always remember, no matter what life may bring you, always love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray. Till next time, be blessed.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, man.